Hi, and welcome to RAVE Leader Chat for the book of James, week number 6, focusing on James chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. A quick couple of announcements beforehand. One is we have 1 week of the book of James left after this, and so we're coming to a close in this study. Just a reminder to kind of think about those 6 marks of well-rounded discipleship and anything else you wanted to get done in this season. Next is that the next season is just around the corner. It'll start March 6th. We are doing a study on the I am statements in John. There's not only a book, but a discussion guide. The books are definitely going to be available this Sunday, and hopefully the discussion guides as well. Please see either Pastor Ronnie or Pete Rupee or Betty Dornbrook, and they can help you get those books this Sunday, as I'm not certain I will be there. So let's go ahead and dive into this week's passage. And really, I want to just sort of highlight question 1 in the study guide as a starting point. Question 1 in the study guide asks, who is James addressing in the 2 different sections? And that is significant because it really, there's some markers there that let us know who he's talking to. And so the first section, chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, James is really addressing the abusive rich people in the community, and they oftentimes were rich landowners and taking advantage. That's not necessarily aimed at the church. It doesn't mean that there's not a lesson to be learned by the church, but it really is aimed outside the church. And then in verse 7, we have the tip off that it's brothers and sisters again. Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the coming of the Lord. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. James gets out of the blocks very fast with, come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming. That's prophetic language that echoes the Old Testament prophets to repent and mourn because the miseries are coming. The miseries that are described there are not going to be necessarily in this lifetime, but divine eternal judgment for the misuse of riches. And then verses 2 and 3 have sort of a great parallel to Matthew 6, verses 19 to 21. Your riches have rotted, your garments have been eaten by moths. We hear those echoes of Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. And we're reminded that James was likely well aware, and there's a lot of Jesus parallels in the book of James. And then that description of rotting wealth and how these holdings can go bad gets played to kind of a hyperbolic extreme in verse 3. Your gold and silver have corroded. It doesn't mean that gold and silver don't corrode, so it doesn't mean that, but it means that it's corroding you. It's not doing what it was intended to do. And then we get to, this is the evidence against you. And will eat your flesh like fire. Again, you have laid up treasure in the last days. So again, a great parallel to that Matthew passage, where your treasure is, your heart is also. And so the question 3 really in the study guide is good as we sort of look at verses 4, 5, and 6. And that question is really, is it all wealth and richness that's being condemned, or is there specific abuses? And 4, 5, and 6, you hear some of those specific abuses, and how they take advantage of others, how they've used their wealth for personal gain and not to be a blessing to others, how they've abused their laborers, and how the harvest cries out against them, just like the blood of Cain or of Abel calls out against Cain. You've got that parallel there as well, and so it's a good question to wrestle with. Now, as I said at the beginning of this section, that this isn't aimed specifically at Christians, but it's a great question for us to consider also. What do we do with the things that we have, and what's our responsibility for those? And I think there's some great question that you could really tag on to question 4 in the study guide. Not necessarily what do you consider yourself rich or not, but what's the responsibilities we have to utilize our wealth and to make sure that we're not doing those things that are described in 4, 5, and 6. Then there's a clear break of topic in verse 7, so really sort of a second separate section. And again, it's tipped off by be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord comes. And so it's a direct contrast to what was above. Instead of having to, with sort of a covetous and fearful heart, amass as much as we possibly can, we are reminded that God's timing is perfect and that God has a plan. And so we're encouraged to be patient until the coming of the Lord. And then James offers sort of three metaphors for us to think about that patience in practice. First, it's the farmer, and the farmer, especially in that area of the world back then, was really dependent on the rain coming when it came. And so you've got that being patient for the early and the late rains, uh, waiting patiently for the fruits of the earth. One of the great things about farming is there's so much out of your control that it really is a constant exercise in faith. So be patient and be patient like them. So verse 8, so you also be patient. Establish your heart, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. It is near. And then in verse 9, there's a kind of a reminder of sort of the quarreling warning in chapter 4. It's a reminder that when we grow impatient, that grumbling starts to take place and we get irritable and frustrated with one another. So verse 9, don't grumble against one another or your brother and sister, so that you might not be judged. You're reminded that God is watching all things. God's not only watching the evil use of wealth by these rich people, God's watching how we utilize our tongue and how we maintain Christian community. And so then in verse 10, we get the second example. As an example of suffering and patience, or maybe endurance and patience. Brothers and sisters, take the prophets. Think about the life that the prophets lived and all that they endured faithfully. Remember that larger topic that we're talking about is a mature and well-rounded, complete, fully integrated faith. And so part of that is being patient and trusting God with his provision and his timing. And then verse 11 turns to that last example. Behold, the blessing for those who remain steadfast. You've heard and you know the steadfastness of Job, who Job endured so much. But it's tied not only just to Job as an example, but that it served a godly purpose, that God has something that he's doing in and through this provision in time. And so see how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So two sort of brief staccato passages, lightly connected through trusting God and whether you, in a selfish way, amass all sorts of things, or whether you continue to trust in God's provision and timing. I hope you have a great conversation this week. Thank you so much for your continued leadership. Take care and God bless.